Donald Trump was recently, repeatedly, and utterly humiliated in an interview with the Fox propaganda network's last vestige of journalistic credibility, Brett Baier. Intrigued? Then click that like and subscribe and enjoy the video. So Donald Trump's love-hate relationship with the Fox propaganda network continues to ebb and flow and twist and turn. It's a modern-day political soap opera. For whatever reason, even though Donald Trump has been ruthlessly critical of Fox ever since their undying, unvarnished support of him started to dull a bit, where they would occasionally criticize him or report the fact that he lost the 2020 election or fact-check him every now and then, as they sometimes do. For whatever reason, Donald Trump agreed to an interview with Brett Baier. Now, Brett Baier, let's talk about him for a minute. He was once part of what I called the holy trinity of the Fox propaganda network in terms of their three credible journalists. You had Shep Smith, you had Chris Wallace, and you had Brett Baier. And between the three of them, they were relatively professional, relatively objective. They would pose pretty consistently tough questions to Republicans in addition to Democrats. And then over time, that trinity fractured. Shep Smith left years ago due to the direction in which Fox was trending. Chris Wallace hung in there for as long as he could, and then he left a few years ago as well, essentially citing the same reasons. And now Brett Baier is all that's left. Now, of the three, in my opinion, for various reasons, Brett Baier is the weakest of the three. He is the least credible of the three. He is the most susceptible to whataboutism and both sidesism and giving Republicans a pass. But he is still, to his credit, the closest thing that the Fox News or Fox Propaganda Network has to a credible journalist. And he still will occasionally flex his journalistic muscle. So, again, stupidly, I don't know why Donald Trump would agree to a sit-down interview with him, since he doesn't like to be asked tough questions, since he gets very upset when people fact-check him. Brett Baier would be the last person on Fox that you would probably want to conduct or have conduct an interview with you. So there's a lot to this, and we'll probably do multiple videos, but I want to play two clips here because they are really ruthless fact checks. I mean, brutal fact checks, especially when you consider the network, Fox, which leans towards Trump. They favor Trump. They grade Trump on a curve, certainly. And then the subject of the interview himself, which is Trump. So when you take that combination, these clips I'm about to show you are just brutal. So let's dive into it. And this one concerns Donald Trump's claim about his genius managerial and administrative capacities and his talent, or his eye for talent, right? He knows the best people and he hires the best people. So this specifically addresses that claim, and let's dive in. Pop the popcorn.
In 2016, you said that. I'm going to surround myself with only the best and most serious people.
Well, I did do that, and we had tremendous, look, we had the best economy we've ever had, the world has ever seen.
Your Vice President, Mike.
Real quick, before Brett Baier gets into this, because it's like a drumbeat, it's steady. As a reminder, Donald Trump did not create the best economy in U.S. history. Even at its best, depending on the metric, like GDP growth was higher even under President Carter, right? The failed Jimmy Carter back in 1980. Now, the Trump economy pre-COVID was doing pretty well, extremely well by most metrics, but also most of that work had been done by President Obama. He inherited a great economy from President Obama. There wasn't like a hard reset where everything went back to zero and Trump built it up in 3 years. That wasn't the case. Obama, as we've discussed, inherited an economic catastrophe from Republican President George W. Bush. Over 2 terms, Barack Obama got the economy firing back on all cylinders, and he handed that economy to Donald Trump in January 2017. Donald Trump was able to keep most of those Obama-era trajectories going until, of course, a disastrous trade war with China, $2 trillion tax cut for the rich, and then, of course, the mismanagement of the COVID pandemic, which crippled the economy. And then, as George W. Bush did before him, this Republican president, Donald Trump, handed Joe Biden an economy in the toilet, and Joe Biden has had to get us out of it. That's modern economic history between Republican and Democratic administrations. But anyway, with that fact check out of the way, we'll get back to Brett Baier.
Pence is running against you.
Yeah.
Your ambassador to the United Nations, Nikki Haley, your she's running against you. Your former Secretary of State, Mike Pompeo, said he's not supporting you. You mentioned National Security Advisor John Bolton. He's not supporting you either. You mentioned Attorney General Bill Barr, says you shouldn't be president again, calls you the consummate narcissist and troubled man. You recently called Barr a gutless pig. Your second defense secretary is not supporting you, called you irresponsible. This week, you and your White House called your White House Chief of Staff, John Kelly, weak and ineffective and born with a very small brain. You called your acting White House Chief of Staff, Mick Mulvaney, a born loser. You called your first Secretary of State, Rex Tillerson, dumb as a rock, and your first Defense Secretary, James Mattis, the world's most overrated general. You called your White House Press Secretary, Kayleigh Canadian, milquetoast, and multiple times you've referred to your Transportation Secretary, Elaine Chao, as Mitch McConnell's China-loving wife. So, why did you hire all of them in the first place?
Because I hired 10 to 1 that were fantastic. We had a great...
Listen, Brett, besides like all the major positions in my administration, like my chief of staff and my secretary of transportation and my secretary of state and my secretary of defense and my press secretary and my communications director, besides like all the major biggest positions, we hired some great people. Like, you know, the White House janitor under my watch, Brett, like phenomenal. He knew a mop better than almost anybody. Man, believe me, now I know all about mops and you know, and brooms and stuff like that. But yeah, I mean, how humiliating, right? And he's going to flounder, right? And I don't know if we'll play, well, we're almost at the end of the clip, so I guess I'll play the full thing. But man, that's brutal. You know the best people, and yet every holder of every key position in your administration has either come out and opposed you, insulted you, or they've remained suspiciously silent, like they're not giving you support. What's that say about you and your eye for talent? Anyway, let's hear what he has to say to defend himself.
Economy. We had phenomenal people in charge of the economy. We had phenomenal people in the military. I'm not a fan of Milley, and I'm not a fan of certain of the television people, but I knocked out ISIS. I defeated ISIS. They said, Mattis, it would take 3 years, and I don't think we can do it. I did it in a period of like 4 weeks.
There's a lot of people who praise you for your policies. I just said that.
That's true. Well, I mean, you just went through a list. But don't forget, for every one you say, I had 10 that love us.
So let's be clear about this. When a president takes over, they get to appoint many key positions, like the cabinet, for example, and national security advisors and things of that nature. But for the most part, the vast majority of the federal government just continues, like the so-called administrative state or the so-called bureaucratic state. They continue. There's continuity of government. The vast majority of people who worked under Obama, worked under Trump, worked under Biden, unless they retired, right? Donald Trump did not go through and read the resumes of the, you know, deputy White House chief of staff's, you know, third secretary, right? So what he's trying to say is, listen, yeah, the key people at the top that I personally appointed and approved through the Senate, and probably the only people with which he was familiar, if he was familiar even with them, yeah, they suck. I think they suck because they hate me. But like the people I've never met and never hired and had nothing to do with, they were great. Well, yeah, but they had nothing to do with you. The success of the vast majority, the tens of thousands, the millions of people working in the federal government, especially if you include the military, they weren't directly hired by Donald Trump. He never read their resume. He never conducted an interview with them. The people that he has the closest proximity to are his cabinet and senior White House staff. And as Brett Baier points out, most of them think Trump sucks. They think he's an idiot. They think he's corrupt. They think he doesn't have the temperament or the judgment to be president again. That's an indictment, right? And so watching him like just go through that, like, oh my God, everybody I've ever worked with hates my guts, which, by the way, if you're a conservative or MAGA supporter, that should be a clue, right? Trump's the common denominator, and people that used to like him and used to support him and worked to make him successful think he sucks. So maybe he sucks. Let's play another clip real quick. And again, we won't go through the whole thing, but where Brett Baier brutally fact checks Donald Trump with respect to the election, the 2020 election.
You say to that female independent suburban voter who feels that way, to win her back?
First of all, I won in 2020 by a lot, okay? Let's get that straight. I won in 2020.
You know that this,
and if you look at all of the tapes, if you look at everything that you want to look at, you take a look at Truth to Vote, where they have people stuffing the ballot boxes on tapes, or
Mr. President,
let's go to recent. Well, wait a minute. Let's go to recent. FBI Twitter. Let's go to recent. The 51 agents, all corrupt stuff, Brett.
Understand about the Hunter Biden,
no, but
all
that's cheating
fair
on the
things.
election.
But
that's cheating on the election.
you lost the 2020 election.
Brett, you take a look at all of the stuffed ballots. You take a look at all of the things, including things like the 51 intelligence agents.
There were recounts in all of the swing states. There was not significant widespread
We're trying
fraud.
to get recounts, real
There were
recounts, not just numbers of
investigations,
votes
widespread
cast.
corruption. There was not a sense of that. There were lawsuits, more than 50 of them, by your lawyers, some in front of
Brett, are you
judges that you appointed.
Look at Wisconsin.
That came out with no evidence.
Wisconsin has practically admitted it was rigged. Other states are doing the same right now, and it's continuing.
There have been
It was
reviews
a
of
rigged
every
election.
potential case of voter fraud in 6 battleground states, and they found fewer than 475 cases.
You know why?
that
Because
were
they
not
didn't
affected.
look at the right things.
Okay,
Brett.
are you going
they
to
were
be-
counting? They were counting ballots, not the authenticity of the ballot. The ballots were fake ballots. You had this
I
was
asked,
a very rigged
Are
election.
you going to go? This is how you're going to tell that independent suburban woman voter
No,
to vote for
we're
you?
off to winning an election, and I think we're winning very well. I got a poll just recently. I have it here. I'd
No,
show
I
you.
know, and I will.
So that's where we are. And this is going to be, in addition to all of Donald Trump's other legal, political, and personal baggage, outside of the indictments, this is the thing that's going to trip the Republican Party up the most in the next election cycle is Donald Trump, because he's a loser, a thin-skinned, malignantly narcissistic, insecure loser who is incredibly stupid and incredibly corrupt. He is so upset that he was so humiliated in 2020, losing to somebody like Joe Biden, who he has no respect for, obviously, despite the incumbency advantage, right, which is an extremely advantageous position. Donald Trump's sensitivity to that, like he is not future driven, right? Even other Republicans are like, Mr. President, let it go. Stop worrying about 2020. You need to focus on 2024. And Donald Trump is incapable of doing it because of all the personality flaws that I just mentioned. So listen, I'll give Brett Baier props for calling Trump out in this respect. It does not vindicate the network. It does not redeem the network, or even in many cases Brett Baier himself for his whataboutisms and both sidesisms. But at the end of the day, Donald Trump needs to be fact-checked in every opportunity imaginable, which is why I'm shocked that he agreed to this interview, given his contempt for Fox News and for fact-checking, period. And Brett Baier, when the chips were down, held him accountable for that. So anyway, really interesting interview, fascinating stuff, and a great insight into Donald Trump's deeply troubled pathology.